President, to convey to you my warm congratulations on your brilliant election to the presidency of this session. Your wisdom, Mr. President, your long and rich political and diplomatic career, your qualities as a keen listener, and your experience as a seasoned negotiator are, for us, all things that will guarantee the success of this session. You can always count on the full support and cooperation of Burundi as you discharge your mandate, Mr. President. Mr. President, your predecessor, Ambassador Denis Francis, deserves just as much admiration and recognition because he discharged his mandate with devotion, skill, and brilliance during the session that we have just closed. Allow me also, Mr. President, to pay equally deserved tribute to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his service to humankind, service rendered through his courageous action, still underway to make the United Nations an organization close to the peoples of the world despite the complex global arena in which the organization works. Mr. President, the theme chosen for this session, namely leaving no one behind, acting together for the advancement of peace, sustainable development and human dignity for present and future generations, is particularly fitting given that today's world is hurtling full throttle towards fragmentation, and we're seeing values of peace, solidarity, and mutual comprehension being called into question. This fragmentation seems to go hand in hand with a new form of radicalization, which is drawing member states further and further away from reaching an understanding about how to address the global challenges facing us in a spirit of compromise and mutual trust. Today, more than ever before, Mr. President, it would seem that the majority of us act as if we were alone in this world. We act as if others did not exist or did not count. Solidarity has become a rare commodity at the very moment where we need it the most. Positive values are being eroded throughout the world, and yet we know that all conflicts, be these direct or proxy conflicts that the world has experienced, are born of the same seed. That is the denial of others, others' interests, whether those interests, that identity, be cultural, religious, or civilizational. In other words, all conflicts arise from the loss of trust, geopolitical jostling, and deliberate misinformation. All of these polarize countries and paralyze societies in a situation which is increasingly worrying. As is only right and proper, Mr. President, my country staunchly condemns all of those who wish to impose their points of view, their practices, or their values or schools of thought upon others. Using the diplomacy of might is right, we condemn all of those who attach political conditions to development aid, whilst at the same time, Mr. President, forgetting that the world is multipolar, that difference in diversity is a driving force for development, economic growth, and the very thriving of our societies. If embraced as the asset that it is, diversity in all its dimensions is a mine of opportunity, possibilities, and a source of great inspiration. Many points of view, in all their richness, experiences, and practices, create a wealth of ideas, knowledge, understanding, and tools to accept the other. All of these can significantly increase a society's ability to prosper, to understand the various points of view in today's world, and allow us to consequently live in peace and in harmony with our environment, be this our immediate neighborhood or further afield. As you know, Mr. President, cultural diversity and the diversity of values are a powerful lever to create ties that are stronger than our differences. Cultural diversity brings people together and as such supports social cohesion, peace, security, and peaceful coexistence. Despite its unifying power, the unifying power of culture, the last 20 years have been marked by a growing instrumentalization of culture and values in order to sow tension and division. Precisely because it is so heavy with meaning and intrinsically bound to people themselves, cultural diversity and the values which we hold dear have increasingly been placed on the front line of conflicts and used as a tool of division, even a weapon of war, used first and foremost, Mr. President, to subjugate weakened societies, particularly in the most fragile regions of our world. This narcissistic exploitation of culture and values has contributed to extending crises and conflicts, but it's also led to human rights being eroded, namely economic, social, and cultural rights. Today, more than ever before, narrowing the divide between cultures, values, and civilizations is urgent and necessary in order to establish peace, stability, solidarity, and allow inclusive development which leaves no one behind. Mr. President, the world that we live in today needs now more than ever before a consensus-based approach to major challenges such as the conflicts which continue to rage, natural disasters, climate change which is worsening, poverty and inequality which are omnipresent, mistrust and discord which are dividing the world. Our spirit of compromise is fading, international solidarity is losing momentum, and of course there are the Sustainable Development Goals which are very far indeed from being achieved. In terms of its role in building a better future and a global order based on the rule of law, a peaceful, equitable, prosperous and solidarity-based world, Burundi, my country, continues to pursue its ambition of building relations of friendship and cooperation based on the principle of sovereign equality and the principle of mutual trust. Our goal is to make Burundi a country that is a friend of all and an enemy of no one. Mr. President, Burundi is a true advocate of multilateralism, a multilateralism in which all countries, whatever their size, level of development, have a role to play in addressing the challenges of our time. You yourself, Mr. President, and our Secretary General already said as much, quite rightly indeed. In this regard, Burundi opposes unilateral measures imposed by certain stakeholders. These measures can unravel and destroy social fabric in the countries and societies targeted. Turning now to the implementation of UN Agenda 2030, Mr. President, if nothing is done to reverse current trends, we are slowly heading towards a situation where we fail to uphold the promise that we made to humankind in 2015 in this very same hall. We stand only 6 years from our deadline. The Secretary General's report on the SDGs and their achievement clearly demonstrates that only 17 to 18% of the SDGs are on track to be achieved. Almost half have seen only scant or moderate progress. More than a third have seen no progress at all, or progress has even been undone. In the face of such an alarming situation, we the people have no time to waste. We need to act together and quickly to save future generations who will judge us by our actions or by our inaction as appropriate. Mr. President, it is crucial that the international community step up efforts to address the various challenges and meet the needs that exist, with particular effort being made to assist countries in special situations such as LDCs, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. The goal here should be to reverse current trends and leave no one behind, as we collectively agreed to do in 2015 through the UN Agenda 2030. Mr. President, nationally, Burundi, like all other nations, is working night and day to significantly improve its people's quality of life. The people of Burundi firmly believe that the only path towards genuine political independence involves economic independence. And to achieve that, Mr. President, the government of Burundi, under the leadership of the President of the Republic, has implemented an ambitious vision, but a feasible one. That vision looks to make Burundi an emerging country in 2040 and a developed country in 2060. The goal sought in the reference document of our President here is to build a nation where its population enjoys full well-being. Our goal is to see a sustained continuation of production and structural changes leading to longer life expectancy and the meeting of fundamental needs. We're also looking through this document to reduce unemployment and poverty in all its forms and manifestations. By 2040, Mr. President, Burundi intends to stand as a country of peace, a country in which everyone lives in decent conditions, where no one dies from preventable diseases. We will be a competitive economy driven by the agro-food sector and our industry, which will be high in added value. Will also be driven by mining for the benefit of our people, and all of this will be done by whilst protecting our natural environment and by paying due attention to equity and gender balance. Burundi will always stand on the side of solutions, and we reiterate our commitment to the peaceful resolution of disputes throughout the world, using tools which preventive diplomacy makes available to us, namely dialogue, cooperation, joint work, and negotiation. You are, of course, aware, Mr. President, distinguished delegates, that no developing country, or rather, says the Speaker, no development is possible without development, and peace cannot be possible without development. Peace without development is a mere pipe dream. Peace and development are two sides of the same coin. The terrorist threat, Mr. President, and the dangers linked to violent extremism have increased greatly in number in recent years, and this is having an ever more bitter impact at a local, regional, and international level. In the face of this existential threat, Burundi has committed to continuing and strengthening its cooperation with other nations to prevent and combat terrorism and violent extremism. We're doing this by making a substantial contribution to peace operations and counter-terrorism operations, namely in Somalia, Central Africa, and in the east of the DRC. Our goal is to support these three brotherly countries in their legitimate efforts to restore state authority across the full extent of their territory. Mr. President, the climate crisis is pummeling our planet before our very eyes, and sustainable solutions are taking their time because of a lack of financing and climate action in order to help the countries of the global south to face this three-pronged planetary crisis, namely climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. Burundi, like all other nations in the sub-region, is increasingly affected by climate change, despite the fact it contributes only minimally to global greenhouse gas emissions. The frequency of adverse climate phenomena such as floods, landslides, droughts, the rising levels of Lake Tanganyika are all demonstrations of how we're facing climate change. These events are affecting agricultural cycles, causing harvest loss, food insecurity, and the erosion of local ecosystems. We're calling for quicker progress to be made to allow countries gravely affected to receive green financing to limit the adverse effects of climate change on the implementation of the SDGs. Mr. President, in order to do its part to stop climate change, Burundi, like other nations that signed the Paris Agreement, made a commitment through its nationally determined contributions document. A commitment to incorporate environmental protection, building resilience to climate change, and food security in to national policies and the vision of Burundi as an emerging country in 2040 and a developed country in 2060. As you are aware, Mr. President, climate change do not only have an impact on our physical environment, it also affects the health of our people. With that in mind, Mr. President, Burundi has established healthcare measures and public health measures and incorporated these into our climate change mitigation plan. And we beat the record set in the recent report of the Global Alliance for Climate Change, because we're now at the top of the list in terms of countries that have given the most attention to their population's health in their mitigation plans. Mr. President, several initiatives to protect and restore landscapes have also been taken, namely a far-reaching national reforestation program called Ewu Burundi Arambaye, or Covered Burundi in French. This plan looks to promote agroforestry and the tracing of forest cover, and this plan seeks to involve all sectors of society. I'd like now to look at human rights, one of the challenges to be addressed. For Burundi, dignity, as referred to in the theme of this session, begins by promoting and protecting human rights. These are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and inextricably linked. My country, Burundi, firmly believes that human rights must be strengthened and fully incorporate the fundamental principles of universality, transparency, impartiality, non-selectivity, non-politicization, and objectivity, as well as the rejection of two standards as a principle. Special mechanisms sometimes imposed to deal with geopolitical tensions in certain areas of the world must be sacrificed in favor of dialogue and cooperation. And in this connection, Burundi must be given fair treatment within the Human Rights Council in Geneva. We call upon certain stakeholders to avoid continually clobbering us with special mechanisms that are political in nature and have no added value in terms of ensuring the enjoyment of human rights in all of their facets. Here, I encourage those who champion such projects, they know who I'm talking about, I ask them to withdraw the initiative to extend the mandate of the so-called Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Burundi. That project should not be renewed. The mandate should not be renewed because the attitude of this mechanism creates useless tensions and avoidable tensions, and those that initiate these projects are politically motivated, cynical, and immoral. International migration is a global reality, a phenomenon that has existed since the dawn of our planet. Our country, our communities, migrants and families are affected unpredictably and all in different ways. Burundi recognizes a need for a holistic approach to human mobility. There needs to be strengthened cooperation at a bilateral, regional and global level in order to facilitate safe, orderly and regular migration. Nationally, Mr. President, Burundi is currently in the process of signing cooperation agreements with countries of destination for labor migration. This cooperation-based approach aims to ensure legal, social, and human rights protection for migrant workers, and it also aims to significantly curb human trafficking. Mr. President, the issue of multilateralism has received particular attention since the very beginning of this session. After 79 years of existence, of the United Nations, the overriding conclusion is that in spite of its limits, of which the world is well aware, the multilateralism has served to significantly improve global problems. The most recent evidence that multilateralism is not dead and buried was the adoption by consensus in this very hall on the 22nd of September of our Pact for the Future and its annexes. This is a concise and action-oriented document. However, Mr. President, despite this encouraging result, there are signs that portend the gradual weakening of our spirit of compromise. There are harbingers of indifference when it comes to collective rules. In an increasingly globalized world where we're increasingly interdependent, no state, however powerful that state might be, can alone hope to address the challenges it faces. States must strengthen mutual commitment, must adopt a coordinated approach based on fair rules of the game to avoid unilateral actions which, as you are aware, take the form of clear interference in the domestic affairs of other countries in clear violation of the principles and values of the UN Charter. Mr. President, I wish to turn now to Security Council reform. Negotiations on this matter have finally become more flexible. We're seeing movement. Through me, Burundi reaffirms its commitment to the Common African position reflected in the Esselwini Consensus. Mr. President, we will never be able to hammer home enough the following fact. The multilateral system is demonstrating that its capacity is limited to effectively guarantee proper global governance. Notable injustice, unprecedented injustice is being done to Africa. It's the only continent absent from the Security Council among the permanent members, and we are underrepresented among the elected members. That injustice must stop now. The desire to perpetuate the exclusion, Mr. President, of more than 1,200,000,000 inhabitants from the table around which we take our major decisions is quite simply unacceptable. Mr. President, universal, equitable, and affordable access to information as well as to information infrastructure is also one of the major challenges of our age. The Internet can be a tool to bring peoples and spaces together, and that's why it was designed. However, the spider web, as we seem to call it, prioritizes rich countries, whilst at the same time developing countries have low levels of internet connectivity. This is particularly true in Africa. Today in our world, our trade and our exchanges are becoming increasingly digital, Mr. President, and as such it's vital that all countries have access to internet, including AI, that is revolutionizing our world. There is a growing gaping gap between the countries of the global north and the global south, and that's meaning that many people in the global south are losing out on social, scientific, and economic opportunities. Leaving no one behind is one of the pillars of the UN actions. And so, as a matter of absolute urgency, this digital gap must be closed in the interests of current and future generations. Mr. President, I would be remiss if I did not inform this august assembly and that our country is committed to implementing the theme of our assembly, that is unity and diversity, to bring communities to a state of peace, sustainable development, and ensuring that everyone can enjoy human dignity. That is our commitment. I thank you.
Muchas gracias al ministro.
My thanks go to the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Burundi. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Mélanie Joly, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Canada.
Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Mr. Vice President, distinguished colleagues, it is an honor for me to take the floor before you today on behalf of Canada and the Canadians. I'd like to underscore that I am meeting with you here on the traditional territory of the Lenape people. This recognition is important because today in Canada we are celebrating the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. during which we recognize and commemorate the indigenous peoples who were here before us and continue to live among us. We recognize the pain caused by decades of abuse, negligence, and racism. Here as well, we would like to commit to doing better and to rectifying the errors of the past so we can move forward together.
Is a country based on the rights and freedoms that are enshrined in our constitutional charter. A core reason Canada is a prosperous society is that beyond offering the freedom to pursue a better life for you and your family, it is also a way for us to provide freedom from the barriers that prevent you from enjoying a better life. Freedom from fear, violence, intimidation, and discrimination. Freedoms that foster a sense of inclusivity and belonging. Freedom that protects the vulnerable and builds stronger communities. Far too often, though, some of the loudest voices claiming to speak for freedom are the ones trying to redefine that word for their own purposes. They claim freedom as an excuse to do as they wish without any regard for the freedoms of others. This is certainly not how we should define freedom. They hide behind the word to tell us everything is broken, to spread disinformation and parrot the lines fed to them by those who wish to interfere in our elections and undermine our democracy. They weaponize the term freedom to further marginalize those in the most vulnerable situations, to justify spreading hate, and even deny people their right to make choices about their own bodies, including limits on reproductive rights. At the end of the day, through all of the noise, what they really mean to say is freedom for some, not freedom for all. Often, the people who claim to speak for freedom are the same people who want the government to decide who people can love, who they are, or even what they can wear. We see it in our country. We see it around the world. At the international level, we see it when groups or countries declare that international law doesn't apply to them. In Afghanistan, we see it taken to its extreme as the Taliban continue to impose inhumane rules against women and girls, banning them from being in public so they're invisible, robbing young girls of the fundamental right to an education. How is that respecting human dignity? How is that protecting the best interests of their people? They need to be held accountable. Last week, Canada joined Australia, Germany, and the Netherlands with the support from 22 other countries to take steps to hold Afghanistan accountable under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The Taliban cannot make international law disappear through simple decrees. Canada is a country that values freedom from oppression, not the freedom to oppress others. There should be nothing controversial about protecting human rights, including the dignity of all men and all women alike. On Haiti, the world cannot sit idly by as people suffer. La violence des gangs et la corruption incontrôlée.
Gang violence and unchecked corruption in Haiti have created a disaster for the population, which has plunged into deep insecurity, with civilians being shot and children dying of hunger. Canada has always maintained that this crisis must be resolved by Haitians, for Haitians. Therefore, the Presidential Council for the Transition and the Government of Transition is striving to restore order, but they can't do so alone. The Haitian people needs a multinational support and security mission that works together with the Haitian National Police, not only to help the police restore order, but also to meet the population's basic needs. That is why Canada has invested more than $100 million to support that mission. It is doing its part. We must show the Haitian people that we will not abandon them. The UN Security Council must send a clear message to this effect, and I'd like to thank them for their decision today. I also would like to thank CARICOM and Kenya for the crucial role they are playing in the response to this crisis. Together, we can bring about lasting peace and stability in Haiti.
Mr. President, what is happening in the Middle East is an unspeakable tragedy. Thousands have been killed in Israel, in Gaza, and in Lebanon, including many Canadians. This is a senseless war that goes against the dignity of human beings. The suffering on all sides must end. What the world continues to witness is a repeated cycle of violence where civilians pay the heaviest price. Canada is joining those urging Israel and Hezbollah to accept an immediate ceasefire. We need to create space for peace talks and save lives. There cannot be war in Lebanon, full stop. UN Security Council resolutions must be respected. Families in southern Lebanon and families in northern Israel must be able to safely return to their homes. We have, and always will, insist that civilians be protected wherever they're from. Next week marks 1 year since the terrorist attacks by Hamas against Israel. And last March, I visited Kibbutz Kfar Aza, one of the communities attacked on October 7. I met Ayelet, a mother grieving her son who was brutally murdered in the attack, and he died protecting his fiancée. Ayelet recounted the terror of that day, the search for loved ones in burned homes. As she spoke about the horrors of October 7th, we heard the bombs as they landed in Gaza nearby and felt the ground shudder. In that moment, the duality of the tragedy befalling the Israeli and Palestinian people was profound, and it is a moment I will never forget. The situation in Gaza is inhumane. The level of suffering is unacceptable, and it must stop. Innocent Palestinians, women and children cannot pay the price of defeating Hamas. It must end. And a ceasefire is needed immediately. Hostages must be released. This requires both sides making real efforts. Mr. President, for lasting peace, Canada has long advocated for a two-state solution. We believe both Israelis and Palestinians have the right to exist. We all know a negotiated agreement is the best chance for Israelis and Palestinians to live side by side in peace and security. Unfortunately, Hamas, a terrorist organization, continues to operate in Gaza, refuses to release hostages, and refuses to lay down its weapons. And meanwhile, the government of Israel is against the creation of a Palestinian state. Violence against Palestinians by extremist settlers and expansion of settlements by Israel in the West Bank continue unabated. And this is unacceptable. Canada supports the creation of a Palestinian state. That is why we are providing security and development support to Palestinians themselves. We will officially recognize the state of Palestine at the right time, when it is the most conducive to building a lasting peace, and not necessarily as the last step of a negotiated process. More than anything, this conflict has led to unspeakable pain. Communities are hurting. People have the right to protest peacefully, but nobody has the freedom to intimidate others. Polarization is a real problem, and division is real. We have a collective responsibility to bring people together. Mr. President, it's now been 2.5 years since Russia launched its illegal invasion of Ukraine. The human cost continues to grow. No country has the right and the freedom to invade its neighbor, and there's no freedom to impose your will on others. This aggression is a blatant violation of the UN Charter. Russia needs to get out of Ukraine now. And the Ukrainian people have the right to be free from fear and from aggression. They have the right to decide what their own future should be. And Mr. President, we all know that if Russia's aggression goes unchecked here, it will continue. Many countries in the region and the hemisphere are wondering if they will be next. And the world must not back down in denouncing this unjustifiable aggression, and Canada will not back down from its support for Ukraine. At the end of October, Canada will host a conference co-organized with Norway and Ukraine on the human dimension of Ukraine's 10-point peace formula. We will focus on the return of children to their families, as well as deported civilians and prisoners of war. Everyone, those affected by this war, is entitled to freedom from violence and from being forced from their home. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, the issues I've just spoken about have to do with massive challenges, and this institution has a key role to play to bring us toward solutions together. The UN's detractors accuse it of being unable to resolve the problems that the world is facing today. And worse, some, one might call them conspiracy theorists, even think that the UN is the cause of some of these problems. Both of these groups are ignorant of reality and the strength of this organization. The UN is a unique platform allowing us to come together and speak to each other on an equal footing, to try to reconcile our differences, sometimes profound, through discussion and through seeking consensus. And that is why Canada supported the adoption of the Pact for the Future during the Summit of the Future held last week. The Pact is a starting point, allowing us to work together to ensure the lasting place of this organization. The UN is not perfect, true, but progress is possible. As said by Secretary General, we simply cannot build a future for our grandchildren with a system built by our grandparents. So, let us build that future together. Mr. Vice President, for almost 80 years now, no woman has occupied the post of Secretary General. That is unacceptable. Last week, I had the great honor, together with my colleague from Jamaica, to host in Toronto about 15 women ministers of foreign affairs from throughout the world. Our intention is clear. The next leader of this great institution must be a woman. It is high time for us to be able to say proudly from this podium and throughout the world, Madam Secretary General. And I will say the same thing for the post of President of the General Assembly. Mr. Vice President, with all due respect, which you inspire in me as well as the President, I hope that next year the delegates will be speaking to a Madam President, and I think that many of us here today share that desire. Mr. President, let me speak to you about my mother. She will be so pleased to know that I'm speaking about her here at the United Nations. You know, my mother and my grandmother are among millions of women throughout the world who fought fiercely for equal rights. They did so alongside the mothers and grandmothers of many of those present here today in this room. Recently, my mother said that we are now part of the consolidation generation. and she's quite right.
Being part of our generation means that we need to consolidate the gains that have been made over time and fight against those who are trying to roll back this progress. It also means that we need to continue to fight so that women and girls everywhere have the right to make choices about their own bodies and their own lives. We see the difference this gap in freedoms creates. When women are robbed of the right to decide when to have children, they lose out on education and job opportunities. And when women don't have access to safe abortions, their lives are put at risk. And when women are denied access to safe contraception and fertility treatment, they lose the power to make choices that have the most profound impacts on their lives. Attacks on sexual and reproductive health rights are an attack on equality rights, and they're an affront to basic dignity. Nous devons toujours avoir
We must all have the right to choose for ourselves what kind of birth control to use. And we must be able to choose for ourselves whether to resort to abortion or assisted reproduction. We, women, have the right to be equal in everything, education, employment, and every other opportunity. We are women, and we are proud of being women. We will never back down. Together, we'll continue to move forward for our sisters, our daughters, and our granddaughters.
Mr. President, 2 years ago, I stood here and said countries around the world were faced with a choice. And we still have that choice today. We can choose a world where rules can be broken by the powerful, bringing us back to darker times of tension and conflicts. Or we can choose a world to uphold human rights, opportunities for all, peace and prosperity, where people work together to solve problems. Canada will work with partners to move us beyond this moment of crisis. A new future is being shaped. We must not fail. Thank you. Merci.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. My thanks go to the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Canada. I now give the floor to His Excellency Charles Fleming, Minister of State of Ireland. Sean Fleming, you have the floor.
President of the General Assembly, distinguished heads of state and government, Secretary General and Excellencies, we gather here at a very important moment. World leaders have agreed a pact for the future, which charts a way forward to meet the challenges facing us as a global community. To do so, we must honour existing commitments, including the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda, and be ready to adapt to new and emerging challenges. It requires us to address the interlocking crises of climate change, conflict, hunger, injustice and underdevelopment. And it requires us to protect the means to achieve progress. For generations, the multilateral system, with the UN Charter at its heart, has driven our best advances. I believe we have a shared responsibility to bring about a world in which each of us can thrive in safety, dignity and peace. We are accountable to those who will follow us and accountable to each other to uphold the UN Charter, to stand up for international law, to ensure the peaceful settlement of disputes, to defend the universal and indivisible nature of human rights, and to pass on to the next generation a functioning multilateral system. Mr. President, the rules-based international order and the international human rights system are our greatest assets in achieving and sustaining peace. Human rights provide a common binding framework. We believe every state has a duty to support and strengthen the international human rights regime and to defend it where it is challenged. That is why Ireland is seeking membership of the Human Rights Council for the period 2027 to 2029. We are doing so because we deeply are committed to human rights. We wish to further contribute to the UN human rights system and the valuable work of the Human Rights Council. We hope that we can count on the support of many of you in this room here today who share our belief in the values and principles we have collectively established. We also have a duty to uphold international law and international legal order. Ireland is fully committed to supporting the essential work of the International Court of Justice and calls on all states to abide by its rulings. Ireland is also wholly committed to the international criminal justice system. The International Criminal Court is a cornerstone of that system and must be allowed to pursue its mandate without fear or favour. We strongly condemn all attempts to intimidate or threaten the ICC, its officials, or those cooperating with the court. There can be no impunity for the most serious crimes of international concern. Mr. President, we're seeing a global backlash against the human rights of women and girls. The gender persecution in Afghanistan stands out for its cruelty and must be denounced. In too many parts of our world, we see hard-won progress threatened and even reversed. We cannot accept this. Our commitment to gender equality must be non-negotiable. We must also address the unacceptable rise in attacks on the right to life, liberty and security of LGBTQI people in all corners of the world. And we must unequivocally condemn all forms of racism, intolerance and hatred, including anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hatred and the persecution of Christians. Mr. President, we are already seeing the destructive impact of climate change. It is clear that climate change is the driver and multiplier of instability and conflict. Ireland worked hard to address this during our recent term on the Security Council. Climate change threatens each and every one of us. From small island developing states in the Pacific and the Caribbean and elsewhere to countries in Africa, Asia and Latin America. Those who have contributed least to climate change are among the most vulnerable to its impacts. This is an enormous injustice. As we approach COP29, we must do everything we can to reduce fossil fuel emissions. As a fellow island state, Ireland is working to support adaptation and loss and damage activities. We need collective action at speed and at scale to avert the most catastrophic impacts of the climate crisis. Ireland and our EU partners will play our role. At the UN last year and again at the Pact for the Future, we have recommitted to the Sustainable Development Goals. Now we need to act with urgency as progress on these targets falters. Ireland's international development budget is at record levels and per capita. We are one of the strongest providers of humanitarian assistance on this planet. We are firmly committed to global solidarity and to reaching the furthest behind first. We will maintain our focus on action to end hunger and malnutrition, and especially the needless global scandal of child wasting and stunting. We will remain champions of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. Mr. President, we face the very real prospect of a regional war in the Middle East. I am deeply concerned at the spiralling violence and the situation in Lebanon. Hezbollah has long been a malign actor in the Lebanon and in the region. We have consistently condemned its attacks. But massive and ongoing Israeli airstrikes on densely populated areas are causing indiscriminate death of civilians and destruction on a vast scale. Hundreds of thousands have been forced to flee. A ground war would be truly catastrophic. All parties to conflict have an obligation to abide by the international humanitarian law. There can be no exceptions. I call on all parties to immediately de-escalate, to step back from the brink, and to exercise restraint. And I call on all states that have influence, including Iran, to use it constructively. We need to create the space for political and diplomatic solutions and to ensure urgent humanitarian assistance can get to those in desperate need. The violence must stop now. Mr. President, the scale of death and destruction and human misery in Gaza is truly horrific and completely unacceptable. Ireland has consistently condemned Hamas for its heinous attacks in Israel on the 7th of October. The taking of hostages is unconscionable. However, Israel's response has been and is completely disproportionate. We need an immediate ceasefire and hostage deal, followed by a massive surge of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Instead, we are seeing an alarming escalation of the conflict in the West Bank and now in Lebanon. The violence and killing must stop. It has long been clear that the only viable basis for a lasting peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians is a two-state solution. The recent adoption by the General Assembly of a resolution on the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice is a step in the right direction. The international community must now act to implement it. Ireland supports the global initiative launched last week here in New York to support the two-state solution. I encourage states to join in this shared effort. Mr. President, Russia's unjustifiable war of aggression against Ukraine represents a severe threat to the global multilateral system. A challenge to the norm that borders cannot be changed by force should concern us all very deeply. We should all be deeply concerned by defiance of the UN Charter by a permanent member of the Security Council. Undermining the rules-based order on which each of us, of our security depends, should concern us all. The transfer of ballistic missiles by Iran to North Korea to Russia for use in Ukraine is totally unacceptable. These transfers are unlawful and threaten international peace and security, and they must stop. This is not just a European security concern. This is a war with global impacts on food security and on energy and commodity prices. Too often, it is those who are least able to respond who suffer the most. And it is a colonial war about annexing the territory and destroying the identity of a United Nations member state. That is why Ireland is committed to holding Russia accountable for its actions and to bringing about a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. As the global community reaffirmed at the first summit on peace in Ukraine, the UN Charter can and must serve as the basis to achieve that peace. It is shocking that Russia has threatened the use of nuclear power in this conflict. The mere possession of nuclear weapons brings the risk of human and environmental disaster. That is why Ireland will propose a resolution to this General Assembly to further our collective scientific understanding of the dangers of these weapons. I urge all countries to join in this resolution. We cannot allow a new nuclear arms race. We must also act to prevent another arms race for weapons beyond human control, and to do so urgently, given the pace of technological development. Ireland supports the Secretary-General's call to conclude a treaty on autonomous weapon systems by the end of 2026. Mr. President, the Horn of Africa and the Sahel region are beset by multiple overlapping crises, from food insecurity, drought and flooding, to actual conflict. Addressing them means working for sustainable development and human rights. The situation in Sudan is appalling. 12 million people forced from their homes. Widespread reports of abuse against civilians, particularly again against women and girls. 25 million people face crisis levels of hunger and are now facing famine. We need to see urgent action. We demand a ceasefire, humanitarian access, protection of civilians, and accountability for human rights abuses. We must do whatever it takes to pressure the parties to come back to the negotiating table and to bring an end to the destructive cycle of violence. And we need to see accountability for those who have committed these atrocities. Mr. President, as we witness these harrowing conflicts, we must not accept this situation. The world as it is now is not the world as it should be. We have seen what can be achieved by cooperation through this organisation, that the fundamental international community has managed to come together in a time of heightened tension to endorse that vision, to agree a way forward, a pact for the future, shows us what can be achieved. We continue to be united in our shared humanity. Ireland will work hard with others during this General Assembly to follow through on our words with action. Thank you very much for listening to me on behalf of Ireland.
Muchas gracias al ministro.
I thank His Excellency the Minister of State of Ireland, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Manuel José Gonçalves, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Mozambique.
Mr. President of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished heads of delegations, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great honor that I address this august assembly and convey to your excellencies and all participants in this session a special greeting from His Excellency Felipe Jacinto Nyusi, President of the Republic of Mozambique. We congratulate His Excellency Philemon Yang on his election as President of this session and wish him success in fulfilling his mandate. Our greetings are extended to the other members of the Bureau. We assure you of our full support in carrying out your duties. We also commend the positive work carried out by your predecessor, His Excellency Ambassador Dennis Francis, which contributed to the strengthening of our organization towards a greater approach to the peace and development agenda. We extend a word of great appreciation to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, for his tireless dedication and advocacy in promoting multilateralism for global peace and security. Mr. President, the current session of the General Assembly constitutes a sovereign opportunity to reinforce multilateralism, our collective action to consolidate international peace and security and global security for the well-being of humanity. These renewed commitments are reinforced through the deliberations of the Summit of the Future and other important high-level events recently held. We therefore welcome the theme of our general debate, which has particular importance due to its connection with the future, which requires urgency in strengthening international cooperation so that together we can face the challenges faced by humanity today to build a prosperous present and a promising future for humanity. We are aware that in just 6 years, the 2030 agenda will expire, and the progress made on its implementation is still tenuous. It is urgent to mobilize the necessary resources for its financing, as well as for other internationally agreed development objectives in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Therefore, we encourage all member states to accelerate the materialization of the commitments made, including the reinforcement of mutually beneficial cooperation to respond to prevailing challenges, including the fight against poverty, conflicts, terrorism, and climate change. Mr. President, Excellencies, we express our optimism about our collective future, where an environment of peace and security reigns. The functioning of our global institutions must keep up with the current dynamics that are imposed upon us. Thus, we align ourselves with the voices that defend the urgency of the reform of the United Nations, especially at the level of the Security Council, for greater inclusion, particularly giving a permanent voice to the African continent, thereby correcting the historical injustice to which it has been subjected. We are encouraged by the continued collaboration between the United Nations and the African Union to overcome conflicts within the context of maintaining a peace, international peace and security. Resolution 2719, adopted by the United Nations Security Council on 21 December 2023, is a significant milestone for African Union-led peace support operations. It strengthens collaboration between the United Nations and the African Union, promoting greater regional and national ownership of peace initiatives. We hope that it will effectively ensure access to adequate, predictable, and sustainable financing required for the operations of the African Union. We believe that this collaboration will contribute to giving greater strength to efforts to prevent and resolve conflicts towards a prosperous and peaceful Africa, the Africa we want, as established in Agenda 2063 of the African Union. Mr. President, Excellencies, the concert between nations has been feasible throughout these times due to the collective observance of the sacrosanct objectives and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, including the defense of the right to self-determination of peoples, respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. It is deeply concerning the escalation of conflicts and tensions in various parts of the world. In Ukraine, unfortunately, there is still no encouraging signs for an end to the conflict. We believe that the safest path is dialogue between the parties. It is up to all of us as members of the United Nations, to persuade the parties to the conflict to end hostilities and opt for a dialogue towards peace between these two countries. In the Middle East, in violations of the principles of international law and international humanitarian law, the conflict continues to take human lives among the civilian population, particularly children, women, and the elderly, as well as destroying civilian infrastructure, causing the tragedy that we unfortunately witness. We call for the cessation of hostilities and the protection of innocent civilians from the conflict. The vision of the existence of two sovereign states, Israel and Palestine, as full members of the United Nations, is the fairest formula that will ensure sustainable peace and stability in this region. In Africa, we are also concerned about the conflict in Sudan, which has killed thousands of innocent civilians, including refugees, causing an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. We reiterate our calls to the parties to the conflict to end hostilities and the need for dialogue in order to restore peace and stability. Mr. President, the use of sanctions and other unilateral coercive measures does not contribute to the preservation of peace, security, and sustainable economic and social development. Unilateralism is contrary to the multilateralism enshrined in the Charter. In this context, we reiterate our firm call for the total lifting of unilateral coercive measures imposed on Zimbabwe and Cuba, as they have significant negative impacts on the populations of these countries, harming their rights and well-being, so as to allow for more fair and equitable development. Mr. President, Excellencies, in January 2023, Mozambique assumed the biannual 2023-2024 term as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. With 3 months remaining until its end, we would like to reiterate the honor and privilege we have had in serving in that United Nations body responsible for maintaining international peace and security. In the last 2 years, Mozambique has made its direct contribution to peace and security in the world, collaborating in addressing all topics on the Security Council's agenda, amongst which we would like to highlight peace and security in Africa, combating terrorism, women, peace and security, and the nexus between climate, peace, and security. We presided over the body in March 2023 and in May 2024. We are leading the ad hoc working group for preventing and resolution of conflicts in Africa. We will soon end our mandate. We reaffirm our commitment to continue collaborating with a view to pursuing the goals that guide the United Nations Security Council to strengthen international peace and security. We therefore thank all member states for the support provided to Mozambique during its mandate and reaffirm our commitment to multilateralism and the principles and objectives set out in the United Nations Charter, which have guided our mandate since the beginning. Mr. President, Excellencies, in Mozambique, we continue to consolidate our young democracy and citizenship, strengthening dialogue and seeking consensus in the various fora of participatory representation. In this spirit, the seventh presidential and legislative elections and for the provincial assemblies will take place on the 9th of October. In the fight against terrorism in the province of Cabo Delgado, our vigorous action against this phenomenon has resulted in progress with the support of SADC and Rwanda and international cooperation partners, despite the prevailing challenges. In this regard, we would like to reiterate our appreciation and gratitude to all bilateral and multilateral partners who have spared no effort in supporting us in the fight against terrorism and for the restoration of peace and tranquility to the victim populations and for the reconstruction of economic and social infrastructures in areas affected by terrorist actions. Furthermore, our country has faced multiple and complex challenges that include exposure to risks associated with climate change, such as cyclical cyclones, droughts, and floods. These phenomena cause, on average, economic losses of around 1.1% of GDP per year. Mr. President, Excellencies, finally, we reiterate the commitment of the government of the Republic of Mozambique to international peace and security, which are essential factors for the well-being of humanity and a prosperous world. I thank you very much.
Muchas gracias al viceministro.
I thank the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Mozambique. And I now give the floor to His Excellency Sheikh Shakbout Nayan Al Nayan, Minister of State for the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the United Arab Emirates.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
May the peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to thank His Excellency Dennis Francis for his outstanding leadership of the previous session. I also congratulate His Excellency Philemon Yang on assuming the presidency of the 79th session of the General Assembly, and I wish him success in this endeavor. From the podium of this General Assembly, a place that has always embraced our ambitions and agonies, we call upon all of you to join hands and work together to create a better world for our sons and daughters and for future generations. A better world in which they can enjoy a decent, prosperous, and stable life. A world in which all political, diplomatic, and economic capabilities and the latest technological and scientific advancements are harnessed to preserve life in all its forms. In the United Arab Emirates, we have focused on this vision. We have unleashed the wheel of progress in every field, from development, economy, and education to technology and industry. Since its inception, the UAE has adopted a transparent foreign policy based on credibility and building balanced relations with all countries. This includes supporting regional and international efforts aimed at achieving stability and reducing escalations, encouraging dialogue and building bridges, as well as resolving crises instead of merely managing them. As our world stands at a dangerous crossroads, we must redirect the compass of our international action to focus on a set of fundamental and non-negotiable principles. Most importantly, we must stand united in the face of contentious issues, support all peoples without applying double standards, ensure the protection of civilians, uphold the rule of law, as well as commit to human rights and respect the principles of good neighborliness. Returning to these basic principles has become more urgent than ever, particularly with the serious violations committed in conflicts raging in our region and around the world. These violations have deepened human suffering, erased decades of progress, and caused widespread displacement, creating massive refugee crises. This has also increased the burdens on concerned and neighboring countries, particularly with the ongoing bloody wars on the Gaza Strip, the wars in Sudan and Ukraine, and the crises taking place in Yemen, Syria, Libya, Sahel, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Haiti, and other countries. It must be recalled that even wars have rules. Parties must respect international law, including international humanitarian law. In Gaza, an immediate and lasting ceasefire must be reached. Rapid, full, and unimpeded access of humanitarian assistance at large scale must be allowed, and the hostages and detainees must be released. The relevant Security Council resolutions must also be implemented. We must act wisely in response to the rapid developments threatening our region. It is evident that what we have warned about is now unfolding beyond our control. We regret to see the war spread to Lebanon, at a time when we were hoping for an announcement about reaching a deal to end the war on Gaza. It is unacceptable to ignore the decisions and advisory opinions issued by the highest judicial body of the United Nations, namely the International Court of Justice. This includes the provisional measures issued by the court regarding the war on Gaza. In this context, we call for maintaining the security and safety of people. We must safeguard regional and international stability, including the security of international navigation, trade routes, and energy supplies. This is especially crucial in light of continued attempts by terrorist and extremist groups to exploit people's suffering for their own political goals. In the Sudan, the warring parties must stop the fighting immediately and permanently and allow unhindered and sustainable access to humanitarian assistance across borders and conflict lines. We completely reject the continued targeting by the warring parties of civilians and their obstruction of the delivery of humanitarian assistance. We strongly condemn the blatant attack launched by the Sudanese armed forces on the residence of the ambassador of the United Arab Emirates in Khartoum on the 29th of September 2024. In flagrant violation of the fundamental principle of the inviolability of diplomatic premises and of international conventions and norms, particularly the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. We call on the warring parties to engage seriously in peace talks. In this regard, We emphasize the importance of building on the positive outcomes achieved in the meetings of the Working Group of the Aligned for Advancing Life-Saving and Peace in Sudan Group, ALPS. We commend all initiatives aimed at finding a comprehensive solution to the crisis. We must all continue working with regional and international partners to alleviate the suffering of the Sudanese people to ensure a safer and more prosperous life for them. In Ukraine, the impacts of the ongoing war have transcended seas and continents. Therefore, it is imperative to find a peaceful solution to end this conflict, which has increased global polarization, created refugee and prisoners crises, and affected global food security. Through our continued engagement with all parties, my country contributed to the release of around 2,000 prisoners of war through mediation efforts between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. We continue to push for dialogue and de-escalation, and we support recovery and reconstruction. As we speak of resolving protracted crises, we must reiterate our full support of Morocco's sovereignty over the Moroccan Sahara region, as well as for the Autonomy Initiative to maintain the territorial integrity of the Kingdom of Morocco. Mr. President, in numerous crises, my country refused to allow the international response to be obstructed by growing global polarization or obstacles imposed by warring parties. To this end, my country has sought to overcome these challenges and has utilized all available means to enable humanitarian work to continue. To help all those in need around the world, in line with our commitment to the legacy of Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, the founder of the UAE. Today, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President of the UAE, may God protect him, directed $100 million in urgent relief aid to the brotherly people of Lebanon to support them in facing the current challenges. When the war intensified in the Sudan, pushing millions of people towards a multidimensional humanitarian disaster, the UAE devoted its efforts to supporting the Sudanese people. We recently contributed $100 million to support UN efforts to address the humanitarian repercussions of this war in the Sudan and neighboring countries. In addition, we established 2 field hospitals in Chad to provide medical services to all those in need, including Sudanese refugees. Similarly, we spared no effort in supporting the innocent people besieged in Gaza. To this end, we have sent urgent aid by land, air, and sea, and provided treatment to the sick and injured Palestinians through the field hospital we established in Rafah and the floating hospital in Al Arish. The UAE also continues to help in evacuating the wounded and sick and their families from Gaza, most of whom are children and cancer patients, to receive the necessary treatment in UAE hospitals. We also maintained our support to UNRWA, which plays a vital role in Gaza. We welcome its recent launch of preparatory programs to resume its educational services in the Strip. We applaud the humanitarian workers for all their efforts, who provide a ray of hope in the dark shadow of war. If we want to bring an end to the 7-decade-long vicious cycle of the Palestinian issue, then we must take concrete steps towards the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, based on the two-state solution. We must also consider the establishment of a temporary international mission in the Gaza Strip upon an official request from the Palestinian government to address the humanitarian crisis, re-establish security and law, and reunite Gaza and the West Bank under a reformed Palestinian Authority. This would enable the Palestinian Authority, after it is reformed, to take firm steps towards reaching a comprehensive and just political solution for the Palestinian issue. My country believes that the state of Palestine, which just a couple of weeks ago took its new seat in this hall like every other nation, has fulfilled the requirements for full membership in this organization. It deserves to be recognized by all states as a fully fledged state under occupation. Mr. President, in parallel with our efforts in these files, my country renews its demand to Iran to end its occupation of the 3 UAE islands, Greater Tomb, Lesser Tomb, and Abu Musa. These islands are an integral part of the UAE. We will continue to urge Iran to respond to our repeated calls to resolve this issue, either through direct negotiations or by resorting to the International Court of Justice. In all other issues, the UAE believes that the best way to resolve crises is through diplomacy. We cannot fight fire with fire. When traditional approaches are no longer effective, it is our duty to renew these approaches to be able to move forward during the darkest moments of our history. Mr. President, building a secure and prosperous future requires renovating the mechanisms of multilateralism to better address the serious challenges surrounding us. Therefore, we must undertake important roles in finding solutions for conflicts and crises, particularly as the current international system has proven ineffective in preventing the most serious crimes or holding its perpetrators accountable. This requires, in the first place, reforming the Security Council through a comprehensive effort that includes all member states of the United Nations. This would allow the Security Council to restore its credibility, fulfill its mandate of maintaining international peace and security, and combat impunity, even in situations where polarization and political considerations prevent the Council from taking action. Developing and poor countries must also be at the center of any international effort. We also must ensure that women and young people are empowered to play their critical and meaningful roles in all aspects of collective action. While we are preoccupied with addressing the current reality, we must not lose sight of the importance of crisis prevention efforts. The deadliest wars in history did not break out overnight. They were a result of extremism, hate speech, and intolerance accumulating over years, if not decades. This requires taking concrete steps to uphold the principles of tolerance and peaceful coexistence and coordinate regional and international efforts to extinguish the sparks of conflict before they even start. Furthermore, collective action is the only way to address the challenges threatening the future of humanity and our planet, including climate change. The outcomes of the 28th session of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, hosted by the UAE, demonstrated what we can achieve when we work together. The historic UAE consensus, adopted by 198 countries, embodies a global consensus on developing measures to prevent global warming above 1.5 degrees Celsius and operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund to compensate the countries most affected by climate change. We will continue to cooperate with everyone to support climate action and clean and renewable energy solutions, including through the Troika of the Presidencies of the Conference of the Parties initiative with Azerbaijan and Brazil to provide a concrete response that contributes to the achievement of the objectives of international climate agreements. We will also continue our efforts to address the issue of water scarcity and provide sustainable clean water for all, including through the UN Water Conference, which we intend to host in the UAE in 2026 in partnership with Senegal. Our other initiatives in this field, most notably, our other initiative in this field is most notably the Mohammed bin Zayed Water Initiative launched this year. With this forward-looking spirit, we seek to explore and harness the potential opportunities provided by advanced technologies, as well as transform emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence, to find innovative solutions for our businesses, lives, and government services. We believe that international attention and investments should be directed towards these technologies to accelerate sustainable development and achieve transformative shifts in addressing the challenges we face in different fields. This will allow the bridging development gaps and supporting progress for all. Mr. President, let us seize this opportunity to reform international collective action, our refuge in difficult times. Let us work together, hand in hand, to create a bright future that the next generations will be proud of. Thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias.
I thank the Minister of State for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the United Arab Emirates. I now give the floor to His Excellency Peter Mohan Maitre Perez, Head of the Delegation of Sri Lanka.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Sri Lanka felicitates His Excellency Philomene Young of Cameroon on his election as the President of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Mr. President, against the background of global turmoil, setbacks and transformations, the aspirations of this year's Assembly for a better global future resonate with those of the people of Sri Lanka. On the 23rd of September, following a transparent and peaceful electoral process and a dignified transition in keeping with our decades of democratic practice, His Excellency President Anura Kumara Dissanayake was sworn in as the 9th Executive President of Sri Lanka. The people of Sri Lanka have vested in him the mandate to realize the people's aspirations for the future and to build a sustainable foundation for future generations. His Excellency President Dissanayake has outlined to the nation his determination to put in place a united Sri Lanka and a transformed ethical political culture. A political culture echoing the wishes of the people. His future trajectory combines nation building based on public trust in governance and in the political system through accountability, integrity, and the elimination of waste and corruption. In the words of His Excellency President Anura Kumara Dissanayake, quote, "We are launching a unified Sri Lankan nation that respects diversity, fully ending an era of division based on race, religion, caste, and class." Close quotes. In order to achieve these objectives, the government has recognized that it is crucial to reinforce stability and confidence in the economy and stimulate growth. The government will work within commitments to reach macroeconomic stability through the framework of international financial institutions and in negotiations with sovereign and private external stakeholders. The government is acutely aware of the hardships that have been faced by the people in the process of economic transition. Measures will therefore be put in place to generate greater resources for enhanced public expenditure and welfare to raise the living standards of our people with equity and justice. Mr. President, the recent vote for change by the people of Sri Lanka presents us with a renewed opportunity, and we are determined to succeed, including with the support of our friends in the international community. Mr. President, despite our consensus on the Pact of the Future, this year's UNGA takes place at a moment of profound global crisis on multiple fronts. In the Middle East, we are closer to wider regional conflagration than when we convened last week, and the humanitarian suffering in Gaza gets worse by the day. The achievements of the SDGs now appears beyond our reach, and we are off target on the Paris climate goal to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. Big power rivalries and geopolitical tensions have reignited and widened, and new rifts are reappearing on north-south lines. Racism, intolerance, discrimination, and xenophobia against migrants are on the rise. Theaters of conflict and tension have opened up on land and in oceans. The developments in the digital realm provides a fertile ground for proliferation of disinformation and hate speech, with the potential of violence. Mr. President, the lingering impact of the pandemic have reverberated throughout the global economy, creating profound economic insecurities, threatening free trade and leading to protectionist barriers. We are spending more on weapons than ever before in the past, and regrettably, the use of nuclear weapons is in mainstream discourse. New domains are being weaponized, including outer space, and cyberspace, while the use of AI is challenging international humanitarian law in the battlefield. Excellencies, today a large number of developing countries, including my own, face a debt crisis of unprecedented proportions. This debt distress severely impedes our ability to invest in sustainable development, as we are unable to meet these financial obligations while simultaneously investing in the future and the well-being of our people. It is a fact that financing challenges remain at the heart of the sustainable development crisis. As per the Financing for Sustainable Development Report of 2024, the SDG financing gap is between US dollars 2.5 to 4 trillion. Staggering, isn't it? Mr. President, given these immense challenges, the need for comprehensive reform of the global financial architecture has never been more pressing. The current international debt resolution framework has failed to respond adequately and efficiently to contemporary challenges. The global landscape has changed dramatically, with global debt, particularly in the developing world, increasingly controlled by international bond markets and non-Paris Club lenders. Think about it. It is therefore time that we review the architecture's traditional moorings. We must urgently reform this system to reflect the new economic landscape. It is therefore necessary, we say, to find a more efficient, comprehensive, and equitable way to address the debt crisis. Mr. President, other institutions of global governance that reflect the world of the past century need to be reformed to meet the challenges of the present and the future. The composition of the Security Council must be expanded to be representative of current global diversity and decision-making. In parallel, the role of the United Nations General Assembly, the most representative primary organ of the United Nations, where all countries have an equal voice, must be strengthened and revitalized. Mr. President, Sri Lanka's commitment to maintaining global peace and security has been unwavering. We recognize that peacekeeping is one of the most effective tools to the United Nations to help member states to manage the difficult phase of transitioning from conflict to peace. Sri Lanka has been contributing to United Nations peacekeeping operations in some of the most hostile and demanding deployments. Over 23,000 men and women from Sri Lanka armed forces and police have contributed to ensuring international peace and security under the UN banner over the past 6 decades and has been commended for high-caliber service. Mr. President, beyond economic recovery, we face an even greater existential threat, the ongoing climate crisis, and the accompanying need for a just energy transition. Although our development strategy has not contributed to climate degradation, Sri Lanka has taken concrete steps to address these challenges. We will increase our nation's forest coverage and increase renewable energy in our energy mix. It is time for developed countries, Mr. President, to fulfill their obligations and assume their fair share of responsibilities under the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. We need their support in mitigation and adaptation efforts, as well as compensation for loss and damage. Without a concerted international effort, Mr. President, to bridge the climate financing gap, the burden of climate impacts will continue to fall most heavily on those least responsible for the crisis. Sri Lanka is committed to phase out coal by 2040 and reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. As a climate vulnerable country, Sri Lanka has been advocating for operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund and called for climate justice. There is therefore an urgent need, we say, for increased climate financing, especially for vulnerable developing nations like Sri Lanka. Mr. President, two other critical issues which are also relevant to Sri Lanka as an island nation were part of the discourse during this year's high-level week. Sea level rise is an imminent reality affecting millions. While Sri Lanka has taken mitigatory measures nationally, as included in the National Adaptation Plan for Climate Change, it is through concerted international action that solutions can be implemented to halt the global warming that is the cause of sea level rise. Sri Lanka initiated the UNGA resolution on declaring 1st of March as the World Seagrass Day to bring international attention and awareness on a small but significant aspect of universal importance of combating climate change. Sri Lanka has further been recognized for its contribution to mangrove regeneration programs as a 2024 World Restoration Flagship by the United Nations under the UN Decade on Ecosystem.